So, hi, my name is Olivia Khalili, and I am the director of Yahoo for Good, Yahoo's social impact program. And I'm delighted to be here today for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's tremendous that Wharton has presenting and hosting this convening. When I was in school, not even that long ago, I didn't feel that there was a forum for this, and particularly kind of a formalized forum to bring together these different types of perspectives and speakers. So it's very exciting for me. I'm also a Wharton undergraduate alumna, so it's nice to be kind of back in the hands of Penn out on the West Coast. So we want to talk about the goal of today's panel is to give you one kind of framework for social entrepreneurship, and then to hear from diverse perspectives of our social entrepreneurs who are kind of working in the field. And we have a variety of perspectives, which is nice. I mentioned that I now work with Yahoo, but I spent 4 years working with Ashoka. We also have Michael here to my left, who currently works with Ashoka. So he and I will present a kind of a larger context to social entrepreneurship that will help to balance out the kind of the tactical and experiential thoughts of our social entrepreneurs. So is there someone who could advance the slide, or I could grab the clicker? That's perfect, thank you. So entrepreneurship, whether it's social or traditional, starts by addressing a need. An entrepreneur then brings his or her experience and innovation and perseverance to meet that need. And whether it's if a social entrepreneur addresses the need, leads with the social impact, and a traditional entrepreneur leads with the market need, right? But what you have is, when you talk about social entrepreneurship, is a confluence. And most people see it as, this is one construct, is a confluence of a social and a market need. Thank you very much. Okay, great. And there's different ways to look at that confluence, right? It can be an integration of social impact and market need. It can be a prioritization of intended outcomes to include both social impact and financial viability, right? So you see this with the B Corp model, for example. Or it can be the application of tools or frameworks traditionally used in one sector applied to another. So one way to conceptualize this is by, on a spectrum, right? With pure social on one end, we've got the pure financial viability on another, and this hybrid, this confluence in the middle. And what we're seeing, one example of the social impact is a human rights organization. So it's incredibly difficult for a human rights organization that's addressing dire human rights needs or refugee care to really have financial viability, to be making a profit. On the other side, you see an example of a mining and extraction company, which in my view is, these are purely not only financially driven, but very much so at the cost of society and the environment. And then you have the growing middle section, which is really exciting. And if I had more dexterity with this presentation, I would have blurred the lines of that center part of the Venn diagram. It is really not self-contained. So a couple of examples to note, and what's wonderful about this middle section is that there are so many models, so many hybrids. I mean, it truly is an area that continues to be redefined and broadened, and you'll hear that through some of our panelists today. So I wanted to point to a couple of models here. Danon's SEMIA project, and this is an example of true shared value, where the impact is integrated to the core of the product. And many of you are probably familiar with Danone, the European consumer goods company known for its yogurt in particular. And the SEMIA program trains women from the informal sector to go door to door in rural communities and sell fortified yogurt products. So not only are they providing economic opportunities to communities that are lacking many opportunities for employment, but they're also providing nutrient-fortified yogurt to these households. So that's an example of shared value. And Grameen Bank, which I imagine many of you are familiar with, this is an institution, of course, that pioneered microlending in Bangladesh. Grameen Bank it's now a fully self-sustainable organization. And in 1995, it achieved this, and it now pays its interest charge on its loans. Its microloans now pay for its operating costs. Vision Spring is another example of a really interesting model. So Vision Spring, again, they train entrepreneurs to administer eyeglass exams and sell very low-cost eyeglasses to low-income, typically rural communities. And Vision Spring right now is operating, their earned revenue accounts for about 40 to 45%, and then they rely on their grants and donations fundraising to supplement that. And their goal is to be a fully self-sustaining, financially self-sustaining organization. And then Teach for America I threw up here. Teach for America, of course, is a well-known nonprofit bringing highly qualified teachers to inner city or rural school districts in need. And I've put this up here because it's not what we typically think of as a social enterprise, right? But it really embodies a lot of the principles of social entrepreneurship that you're going to hear from some of the panelists today, including Michael, who will give a framework of how Ashoka views social entrepreneurship. And without getting too granular, I conceptualize, and I believe many of the panelists up here do as well, as social entrepreneurship is a larger bucket, and comprised within that is social enterprise. So social enterprise is really the subset of social entrepreneurship. I mean, we can tease that out a little bit in our conversation. So I want to introduce our panelists today. I have Michael Zakaris, who is the director for Ashoka Venture. And Ashoka is thought of as the pioneer of social entrepreneurship. We have more than 4,000 Ashoka Fellows globally. And Ashoka identifies and supports social entrepreneurs. They do so through a variety of different programs, but that is kind of the bread and butter of the organization. Brandy DeCarli is the founding partner of Farm from a Box, which is a micro-farming solution that provides rural communities with the tools they need to grow their food and earn an income. Tomas Alvarez is the founder of Beats, Rhymes, and Life, which uses hip-hop to address mental health conditions among youth of color. Founded in 2011, Beats, Rhymes, and Life has worked with 800 youth in Oakland and New York areas. And then Chris Adegeka is the founder of Rides for Life. Rides for Life builds and runs mobile health clinics in rural communities, primarily Uganda. And these mobile health clinics are retrofitted to include a lab, a pharmacy, and a general practitioner's room. Chris founded Rides for Life also in 2011. So as our first question, I've asked the panelists to give us a one-sentence description around what social entrepreneurship means to them. Michael, do you want to start us off? I think you might have the most dissenting perspective.
Well, maybe sort of the broadest definition, I suppose. So I would say, I would define a social entrepreneur as someone who applies the entrepreneurial skill set to an intractable social problem, and does so with vision, with creativity, and with a sort of authentic, full commitment of self. I guess that would be my definition. Yeah.
That's a good one. We actually joked about using hyphens and semicolons in our definition. I would actually define social entrepreneurship as using the engine of capitalism to really drive long-term positive societal and environmental change in a replicable and scalable way.
As a newbie to the world of social entrepreneurism, I would define it very simply as remixing paradigms.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's solving a social. It's helping individuals that are less fortunate than you are, but doing it in the most efficient and sustainable way. And by sustainability, I mean financial sustainability.
So, okay, hearing that, like, who's excited for the discussion that is about to come, right? This is pretty amazing. So, Michael, I wonder if you could give us some more context setting, and I left this part to you to talk about some of the trends that you are seeing, that Ashoka is seeing in social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, great. So hopefully many of you have heard of Ashoka. We're 30 plus years old, and I think one of the earliest organizations to start talking about social entrepreneurs. So 30 years ago, those two terms didn't really make sense together, and yet the sort of founding principle of Ashoka was really in some ways to challenge the notion that business had a monopoly on entrepreneurship, right? Because we saw these people who had the same kinds of skills that one associates with entrepreneurs, the ability to see your field sort of 5 or 10 years ahead of everyone else, a certain passion, creativity, innovation, but they were applying those skills to really difficult social problems, whether they're around mental health, whether they're around sustainable agriculture, health, et cetera. And unlike traditional business entrepreneurs, there was no ecosystem of support if you were this social entrepreneur, right? There was no professional network. There were no VCs and angel investors. You were working nights and weekends because there was no money to be made in what you were trying to do. So Ashoka really stepped in and said, let's, provide these people with some basic financial support early on, and then let's also try to build this ecosystem so that 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, someone can actually set out to do a career in social entrepreneurship, and they're not going to be, still living at home. And so I think, we've seen the field evolve tremendously over that time. Again, there's so many sort of buzzwords now around social entrepreneurship, social enterprises. We saw that, you ask 5 different people or 10, you're going to get slightly different versions, or sometimes very different versions of a definition. But what I think, since we have limited time, a couple of trends that I would point to are, our fellows, Ashoka fellows, and as you mentioned, there's somewhere probably just shy of 4,000, and we have a little over 200 in the United States. They're really as concerned, and I think the best social entrepreneurs are as concerned with advancing an idea as they are with growing an institution. Right? These things are not the same. You can have an institution, it doesn't matter how it's set up, whether it's a pure for-profit, whether it's some kind of social hybrid, whether it's a civil society organization. You want to grow your organization, you want to grow your budget, you have to pay your staff. But the fundamental question they're asking is, how is the world going to be different in 10 years? And what role is my organization going to play in making that happen? It's not just, how am I going to grow my budget, quadruple my budget, or it's really, what is my role in facilitating a larger paradigm shift, a remixing? And that's, again, a different mindset, and I think one that Ashoka in particular looks for, because when we're talking about large-scale systemic change in society, one organization is not going to do it. I don't care how good you are or how big you get. So it's not just about franchising, it's about sometimes how do we give away what we're doing? And we measure success of our fellows in part by how many others have independently replicated their work, because that's a sign of traction. So that's one interesting trend. I think another one is a real mix of models. So we're starting to see more now of our fellow applicants come in with hybrid models so that they're getting past the sort of relentless grant application cycles, which I think is really healthy. But I do think it's still very important to remember that there's a lot of social problems out there for which it's difficult to imagine a pure market model to address. So we can't get too fixated on the model. We need to still focus on what are we trying to solve here, and then one model may work best for this problem, another one may work best for that one. I think another quick thing is just social, and we'll hear this certainly from the social entrepreneurs here, is these social entrepreneurs, not this hero who sweeps in with the cape, and fixes things for everyone. What they do almost better than anything is they create roles for others to be change makers. And because that's what sustainability is all about. It's not about fixing broken people. It's about how do we build systems, shift systems so that others can own these solutions, run with them. Your organization may move on to a different country, it may close down completely, but you sort of tilled the soil for a fundamentally different environment. And again, that takes a long time, but I think that's really a key mindset. And finally, quickly, I think in this country, there's just there are 60% of Ashoka Fellows are in 4 cities. The Bay Area is the most sort of highly concentrated area. That includes Oakland, not just San Francisco. In fact, Oakland's the new center of social innovation, I think, because no one can afford to live in San Francisco. And it's Boston and DC and New York. So 60% of our fellows, 90% of Skoll fellows are in those 4 cities. So on the one hand, this is not that surprising, right? I mean, Silicon Valley is sort of the center of business innovation as well. And so it's not to disparage that we have these tremendous ecosystems, social innovation ecosystems in these 4 places. But Ashoka is making more of a concerted effort now about thinking of how do we do that in other parts of the country, and never mind rural America, Native American and Indian reservations, ranchers in the Mountain West, but even just the Dallases, the Atlantas, the Chicagos, the Los Angeles. We need to develop that same kind of ecosystem so that good ideas for humanity can be elevated no matter where they originate. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Tomas, could you share a bit about your founding story, the inspirational maybe moment or experience you had that led you to create Beats, Rhymes, and Life, and really what issues that's looking to tackle?
Sure. So definitely something that Michael said resonated with me. In 2004, I pioneered one of the country's first hip-hop therapy programs. I did that as a school social worker, trying to engage young men of color in mental health services. When I was looking at the barriers for this particular group for accessing and utilizing services, it really centered around what was being offered to them wasn't culturally responsive, culturally relevant. How it was being offered was from a deficit lens, from a pathology lens, and who was offering it. I work in a field that is literally dominated by white women. What that means is that the mental health workforce is oftentimes not culturally reflective of the communities that they serve, and that can create a lot of cultural barriers. So looking at the how, the what, and the who of mental health and the barriers that prevented a lot of young men of color from using services, I set out to create an alternative. And I started by looking at what these young men were already doing to help and heal themselves. At lunchtime, they were freestyling amongst each other, which is improvisational rap. That's why you don't know what freestyling is. And they were getting kicked out of class for writing raps. So the hip-hop expression was aiding in their catharsis, their healing, their ability to build a positive peer network, develop a positive identity. And so to me, it was a no-brainer. It was formalizing that process. And I also grew up with hip-hop, and so for me, it was very transformative. And so I set out to really create a formal hip-hop therapy program, one of the country's first. So going back to something that Michael said, it was really responding to a need, because these young men were on the verge of getting expelled and suspended from school. And we, in recent years, the disparities facing boys and young men of color have been really documented and promoted. It's become more of a public awareness issue. But for me, I'm not just concerned about the success of my particular organization, but as a pioneer of a field, because really hip-hop therapy is a new way of promoting mental health and administering mental health services for marginalized communities. And hip-hop is everywhere. And so the field has emerged in 10 years that I've been doing this work, 10 plus years. There are people all over the country, all over the world doing hip-hop therapy, folks that I'm connected to. And they're each doing it in different ways, very much like social entrepreneurship. But there's so much potential for really challenging the status quo of the mental health field, which again is inherently deficit-based, pathology-focused, has a really complicated history with marginalized communities in that not a very high success rate around engagement. And again, a lot of the models used were not developed with input from those communities, right? And so how do we spend hundreds of millions of dollars in each state on mental health services, and yet we don't see a reduction in the disparities, right? And so we know that system is not really effective, and it needs to be disrupted. And what we're trying to put forward as an organization is disrupting that system by looking at the ways that communities are helping and healing themselves, what we call community-defined strategies, and formalizing that and partnering with communities to create it. And so for me, it was, again, trying to create a voice for young people, create a stage for them to help and heal themselves, but also create a challenge and change my field, which I believe in. I believe in mental health. And so,
Do you have examples of how your work is influencing the field beyond your institution?
absolutely. Our organization has inspired people all over the world to adopt the concept, the idea of hip-hop therapy. We are consulting with numerous behavioral health care systems throughout the state of California. There are 58 counties in California. Each one of those counties has systems. We're in several conversations with numerous counties around developing a train-the-trainer program to bring hip-hop therapy to those counties. And our goal is within the next 5 years to have our model adopted and embraced. And so, systems are realizing that they have not done a good job with respect to engaging young folks of color, and they're looking for new and innovative and effective strategies for doing that. And so people are looking to us and our track record, and also the traction that we've gained around advancing community-defined strategies. And the field is starting to shift, especially with the passage of the Mental Health Services Act in California 6 years ago. A new funding stream has become available for prevention, early intervention, innovation in mental health. And so organizations like us are really well positioned at this point in time, because mental health is 20 years behind, right, in terms of innovation, as are a lot of different sectors and industries. And so folks are really looking to us, and that's happening through conversations and partnerships and collaborations on projects. We're partnered we train 5 of the largest mental health service providers in the region. And these are $30, $60, $90 million annual mental health organizations that are coming to us, a small innovative organization seeking consultation because they realize that they don't have what they need in-house to be able to meet the needs of their constituents.
That's great, thank you. So as we're going through as you become a founder and you grow into your organization, it can be quite isolating and lonely. And Michael referred to Ashoka helping to create a space for social entrepreneurs to connect with resources and like minds within a community. Chris, can you talk about how your journey through that? So what were some of the resources that you accessed, and how did you bring support behind Rise for Life to get that off the ground?
It's hard to start from the middle, not going from all the way from the beginning, but I will try. I wanted to say something about social entrepreneurship, and I think if you forget everything I say today, this is one thing you should remember. I'm an engineer by training, so there's what they call axis, X, Y, and Z, okay? So if you put 3 fingers out like this, and you align yourself with this axis, let's call it Z, and this is Y, and this is X. If you look at yourself, and this is your head, right? And you look at this finger right here, and that's your heart. So whatever you do in life, if you get your mindset to align with what your heart thinks, and whatever you're reaching out to give to the world or to present to the world, should all these 3 things have to align, and you never have to work a day in your life, because you'll be really happy doing what you do because you love it. But going back to your question, Rise for Life started in 2011, but before that, I just kind of give you a little bit of a history of my story so that you get a sense of where I came from and to be where I am. About 9 or 10 years ago, I was one of those kids that never wanted a pair of shoes, like those kids you see on television that they talk about, the poor kids in Africa with no shirt, grazing cows, running around. And then just a miracle, literally a miracle happened. An individual like you was just traveling through my village and kind of came across me, and they offered to send me to school. And of course, there's a bigger story behind that. But they offered to send me to school. I started going to school in Uganda, and eventually they offered to bring me to America to come and live with them while I go to school. So I went to school at UC Berkeley, did my bachelor's, master's, did my PhD in mechanical engineering. But last year, I took a leave of absence from my PhD to continue concentrating on my work. But while growing up, And why I was in this dire condition was because both my parents passed away of HIV when I was a little kid. I was about 7 or 8. And I had 4 younger siblings I had to take care of. So my parents passing away of HIV/AIDS, they were among patient zero, like about 25 years ago, where people were trying to figure out what HIV/AIDS is. But once they passed away, I was the little kid who is older, was supposed to take care of my younger siblings, and one of my siblings passed away in my care because the hospital was about 8 miles away. So all those experiences kind of stuck with me for a while, but I didn't know what to do at the time because I didn't have much help myself. But when this opportunity came by to come and go to school in America and get my engineering background, I combined the 2 experiences, and it was a perfect opportunity for me to create this organization and give back in a way, but at the same time solve this big issue, which is access to health to folks who barely have it. So in developing countries, a big percentage, like I will speak for Uganda in particular, over 80% of the population live in rural areas. And that's about 37 million people. 80% of that live in rural areas. But hospitals are in the towns and the cities. So someone has to go 10, 15 miles to go find a hospital. So our work at Rides for Lives is to try to decentralize the hospital setting and bring it to the people that need it in rural areas where actually the majority of the population live. To gather the resources, it all started with, I was the valedictorian who graduated, gave a speech at school, and some individual from the audience, part of the speech was, what's your next move? What are you doing next? And some individual from the audience offered to give me $25,000 just like that to go get started. And then I was invited at another speech. I got another individual to match the $25,000. It became $50,000.
Would you like to take the stage right now?
So that kind of helped with the getting started. But I would say I'm a very, very lucky individual. There's so many people who need and deserve the opportunity that I got, but they don't get it. So not everyone is going to walk around and someone will throw $25,000 in their hands. But at the same time, I would say there are fellowships, there's resources all over, there's Ashoka, there's Echoing Green. There's so many fellowships and business competitions that you kind of tap into to get resources to get started.
So, Tomas in particular, you've talked about working across different sectors with different institutions. You work with a lot of public health and state and county. Brandy, you also talked about the importance of cross-sector partnership and collaboration with various stakeholder groups in the work that you do with Farm from a Box. So can you tease that out a bit more? In our conversations, I feel that was probably an area you gravitated toward naturally because you had competency in it and you've grown there. But can you share what are some of the best practices that you've learned, and what have been some of the trip-ups along the way to learning those lessons?
Boy, have there been trip-ups. I would say, taking it back to just the genesis of our idea of Farm from a Box, my business partner and I were building youth empowerment centers in Kenya. And we were really focusing on taking a modular unit and making it so that it was pre-configured for education, health, and sport. As we were doing that, we thought, right, okay, well, that's all fine and good. However, if the kids are still hungry and they're not getting proper nutrition, there's a fundamental need that has to be met. And that was really the birth of Farm from Box, is how could we take that modular sort of component that a shipping container offers and make it so that it could act as a micro infrastructure. As we were going through that process, we thought, all right, well, how can we do a closed loop system? So we started looking into things like atmospheric water generators and millinators that would make composting and all of these different things that we thought were brilliant. But we didn't really have the full breadth of knowledge in terms of what was actually going to work on the ground. So it was our development of our cross-sector partnerships really just started out of, we need to know, and we don't know. So we started speaking with on-the-ground NGOs that were doing work in different communities. We started speaking with women's farming cooperatives out in the Rift Valley of Ethiopia and figuring out what is it that you need, what is working, what isn't working, what is working in terms of government aid and food aid and what's missing there. So as a result of some of those conversations, we really started to shake up what our strategy and our idea is, figure out what would be the best and most effective things to be able to include in a box that would be able to ultimately fit the needs of the users on the ground. And really, there's no way we would be able to do what we're doing if it wasn't through a collaborative mechanism. And the more research that we were really doing and more conversations and dialogues we were having, as we've discussed, if we did not approach this from a participatory manner, there's just no way. I mean, it's kind of a funny thing. People often think, oh, well, rather than taking the top-down approach, you should take the bottom-up approach. Well, we've really decided, throw all of that out. We're doing top-down, bottom-up, side-side. We're doing the entire ecosystem to make sure that we're bringing in the opinions and expertise and advice and know-how of every single stakeholder that's going to be involved so that we have something that is actually going to be a work and effective for the long term.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any examples of some of the challenges as you have developed that multi-level engagement approach?
Oh boy, it's been interesting. I'll say it kind of echoes into our beginning conversation of social entrepreneurship and our choice to become a for-profit in this route. When we first walked in and started a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture in Ethiopia, he's about 6'7". He's a huge, daunting man. He doesn't even look up. He says, "Are you a for-profit or are you a nonprofit?" We said, well, okay, this is the do or die moment. We're a for-profit. And he says, guys, there's too many nonprofits around here. Nobody's getting anything done. So it was an interesting, it's an interesting perspective where we're like, okay, well, let's make sure that we're really bringing all of the stakeholders so that we are getting something done. We are taking into consideration, again, some of the perspectives that are happening from across the entire board and making sure that we can do something that is adaptive to multiple situations and fit the needs of the users.
Yeah. So one of the strengths of the sector, I think, is because it is so fluid and flexible and growing and pioneering, that is a real asset to be curious. And there's an allowance and acceptance of that. So you can be a learner, you can be a continual student and question answer. And you don't have to come, there's not a perception that you have to come in as the expert. And I think, in my personal experiences of finding my way through on my path of social impact and business, kind of the confluence there, and in hearing from the perspectives that have just been shared, I think that that's a real benefit. And it seems, Brandy, certainly you've expressed that, and Chris, you've expressed that as well. Tomas, can you talk about some of your stakeholder engagement? And you've done it with stakeholders that are pretty notoriously difficult, right? We're talking about kind of municipal, state-run health centers, which have, I don't know the details, but I'm sure they have quotas and they have backlogs and bureaucracy. How did you penetrate that?
So we have we have numerous stakeholders. So there's, of course, the young people that we work with are stakeholders in the process. And they're typically looked at and labeled, unfortunately labeled as resistant to therapy or at risk, right? We look at our youth as being at promise, and that's how we start building the relationship with them. We also look at the systems as being at promise as well. So we take a strength-based approach with all of our stakeholders, and it's been challenging to deal with systems that really are driven by Medi-Cal reimbursement. Is the primary funding strategy for mental health services. So if you're not familiar with that system, it requires that individuals meet what they call medical necessity. So if you don't have an Access One diagnosis, you can't access services, right? But there are a lot of communities that are not in that formal system, and as a result are not even eligible for services. And so really, trying to work with systems that have adopted and these values and these policies that really have been set by policymakers who are probably the furthest away from community and furthest aware of what communities really need. And because there's federal implications and state implications, a lot of the funding priorities and policies, and even I would just say the culture, has been trying to be culture shifters as an organization. And really, and now, as I mentioned, the Mental Health Services Act is a great piece of legislation which created a new annual funding stream for prevention, early intervention, and innovation. It taxes people who make over $1 million. In California, less than 1% goes into a big pot. That pot has grown from $800 million to now $1.9 billion annually, and it gets divvied up amongst the counties. And so it's challenging in that, and I use that example to say that at different levels, whether you're talking about the healthcare reform, the national level, whether you're talking about Mental Health Services Act at the state level, or different initiatives at the county or local level, you have this push and pull. You have folks who are trying to advance a culture shift, and you have people who are ingrained in the status quo. Right, and there's all these battles kind of happening, and so for us, it's been very helpful to identify who are the allies, who are the people who believe what we believe, who value what we do, and how can we work together to really enhance, from a strength-based perspective, our mental health system of care, and really challenge ourselves to look beyond this notion of a system of care to really a community of care. And really partnering with various stakeholders who make up that community, not just the funders, the foundations, or the donors, and the public systems and the policymakers, the community itself as well, right? How do we build, how communities build capacity so that, because that's the only way that we're going to really eradicate health disparities. It's not going to be one organization or one public system or one foundation or a certain group of philanthropists that do it. The problem is too huge. It's integrated in so many other different systems, and mental health is impacted by everything. And so, really, it's about leveraging the collaboration. It's about finding people who are interested in new approaches and innovative approaches. So for us, it's been a challenge, but we've also gained a lot of traction. And I also got to say, I'm not a millennial. I barely missed the mark, but I'm 37 now, and so and I grew up with hip hop. And what I noticed in my travels throughout the state of California are there are professionals that are around my age that are becoming into positions of leadership. And I find that the conversations with these directors and managers are shifting, right? Because the old guard is transitioning out, a new guard is transitioning in, and that demographic is a demographic that grew up that remembers a time without the internet and has gone through have seen tremendous advances in technology and in various sectors, right? And so the conversations are shifting. And it's an exciting time to be a social entrepreneur. And as somebody who never considered himself a social entrepreneur until a year ago when I became an Ashoka Fellow, every social entrepreneur that I've met through Ashoka has blown me away. And so it's a field that I really believe in, and it's a field that is giving me not just access to funding, but also what to me is more important than funding, which is mentorship, which is strategies, which is practical wisdom. And relationship, because again, we cannot do it alone. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together.
So I'm thinking about the notion of taking your impact beyond your organization, your institution. Michael, could you share an example of one or two entrepreneurs whose work that do a good job of that? So they take it not only beyond their institution, but maybe they do that through packaging tools or models that are replicable, and they really help to support that learning and replication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can stay local. So we've got a fellow in Oakland. Her name's Janelle Orsi, and she founded something called the Sustainable Economies Law Center. So she's a lawyer by training. She went to Berkeley Law and then did what no one does after you graduate from law school: start her own law practice. And she did it because she wanted she was interested in the sharing economy and in facilitating, local economic activity, everything from worker cooperatives to family farms, urban farms, et cetera. And what she realized very quickly is that the legal infrastructure that's in place is actually makes this kind of innovation and new economic models more difficult. So these largely are barriers to that kind of, because if you have a family-owned, family farm and your kids are working, you have child labor laws you have to deal with, or there are, health and safety laws. Really, the laws were in place from the time of sort of factory manufacturing, and the world has changed and a lot of them haven't kept up. So she wrote the book called, Law in the Sharing Economy, and she's just this, she's got so much wisdom about what to do here. But she's a small outfit in Oakland, and she works with a handful of lawyers and law students, and they have these free legal clinics for, again, small-sized, often immigrant entrepreneurs who can't afford to pay $300 an hour for a lawyer, and so the law is just sort of outside of their access. So what she's doing is trying to distill the principles of what she's developed, and in other words, what kind of laws do we need if we actually want the sharing economy to take off in a big way, instead of just be these little blips here and there, and then how can I disseminate these ideas really broadly? So part of it was through the book, part of it is they're now working on developing what they're calling like a million lawyers network. So they want a million lawyers all over the world to be able to contribute to this and think about it. She's talking to law schools because it can start with curriculum and how law students are actually thinking about this type of law, because there's increasing interest. And simultaneously, they're helping draft and pass legislation in the state legislature. So they were behind a pretty significant piece of legislation called the Homemade Food Act, which passed in, I think, 2012. Which really reduced the barriers to various kinds of micro-enterprise activity. So again, it's not so much that Janelle is interested in growing the Sustainable Economies Law Center and sort of franchising it across the country. It's that, it goes back to the idea of this institution. There's a set of ideas that are really powerful, and now the question is, how do I get those into the groundwater? And it's a different challenge. It's a different way of thinking about how you scale. Yeah, and so that's where her mind is. And then there's another person, again, locally working at San Jose, and he's pretty early stage, but he's working on some criminal justice solutions. And he's trying to build a field that he calls participatory defense. So it's really marrying community organizing principles into the court system, which just hasn't really happened yet. And he sees this as essentially giving the people in the communities who are most affected by mass incarceration the tools to influence case outcomes and actually change the power dynamic of the criminal justice system. But once again, he's doing this, he's figured out a model that works. They do everything, these really interesting mitigation packets, which kind of brings the full humanity of these people convicted of crimes into the courtroom. It has reduced sentences by a total of 1,800 years over the last decade, cumulatively just in San Jose. So these are make or break moments for a lot of families. Right. The difference between 6 years in prison for a single father versus parole transforms the life of his daughters, right, completely. And so these ripple effects in the community are massive. But so he's figured out something that works, and now he's just a recent Ashoka and we want to sort of help him think, okay, what is the way to get how do you get this attached in St. Louis, in New Orleans, in a way that can adapt to the local context? So he likens it to a martial art in a way, where there's sort of a set of movements that if he goes to St. Louis 5 years from now, he'll recognize that this is participatory defense, but it won't necessarily look exactly the same as what he did, right? So there'll be adaptations of it. And so again, that's a different way of thinking about scaling.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was just going to say, use that scaling. That is, so so much of their work in these two examples is advocacy and dissemination of their ideas, and that is their way to scale. It's not more centers necessarily. So I wanted to kind of go from that to a bit more tactical and talk about how you're setting up your businesses. What models are you using? The panelists here have a really interesting variety. So Brandy is a for-profit, but you also have a 501c3, which is used for R&D. And Chris has a C Corp and also a hybrid, right?
Yeah. 501c3 and
501c3 too. So it's a combined hybrid. So Chris, can you start us off and talk about how did you decide? I mean, I think when I work with entrepreneurs, this is a really interesting question. I always get, well, can you help me be X type of model, right? And it's really looking at, well, not necessarily what's the model and what category do I want to think, do I feel I should fit into, but it's kind of taking a step back and saying, well, what's my outcome? Focusing on that. the intended outcome, and then working backward and saying, well, what model allows me to do that? Here's how I believe I could be generating in revenue, whether it's like primarily donation-based, whether it's primarily fee for service, and then coming to a model. Oftentimes, as you can see, it's cobbled together through various legal and tax structures.
So I would say, like, nonprofits have been around for forever, and going back to your point, some of them are there and they don't do much, and in the past 5 years or so, things have started to change, whereby every place you go to apply for a grant, they want to know your sustainability plan. Like, how are you going to be sustainable? If we give you $100,000 today, is this it? Or are you going to be able to generate revenue and sustain yourself without me giving you another $100,000? So we started off as a 501c3, and everything was going great. We were serving thousands of people, and we go out, raise grants. It's kind of money in, money out, money in, money out. That gets tedious. It gets really tiring, and at the same time, you get a lot of rejections because people don't see anything going past their dollars that they're giving you. And then there's this whole other sector of impact investment where individuals are willing. They don't really care. They do care, but they don't care too much about the ROI as the VCs would. But they also want to see you kind of create an entity that will be there longer than a few dollars that they give you. So with that, we really had to look at our organization and see, okay, if we're getting dollars in, dollars out, how are we going to sustain ourselves in the long run? And we had to formulate a for-profit entity to be able to attract impact investors, but at the same time keep the 501c3 arm to bring in their dollars to subsidize the service for individuals that do not afford to pay. Because for the most part, if you're in social entrepreneurship, especially in developing countries, you go into a place where people are living on less than $1, and then you're trying to sell something to them. Even if you say it's 50 cents, 50 cents, you've already cut out a huge percentage of the people you really intended to serve. Because the ones who can afford to pay can go somewhere and find it and pay. But the ones you actually wanted to serve cannot pay the 50 cents. So that's kind of like the reason we wanted to have both models. So we bring in the philanthropy dollars to subsidize for the people who can't afford, and then have impact investment to come in and we serve the people who cannot afford to pay.
Right, similar to Vision Spring, the example I mentioned earlier. So I got the flash timer card. And I do want to open it up for audience questions. We have a couple of minutes to do that, I believe. So I think there are some mics floating around, or just please stand up and share your question.
Hi. Hello? Hi. My name's Elaine Chow. I'm from a Midyar network. I have a question for our social entrepreneurs on the panel. It's a pretty general question, but I'm wondering, how can your investors and funders best support you?
You want to go? Yeah, can go.
I'll dive in with that one. As we're passing it. First of all, Elaine, it's good to see you again. It's been a little while. It's an interesting thing. I think in terms of impact investors, how it is that they can really best support, it's got to be across the board. That may be one of the common denominators of the conversation that we're having, is it's so much more than singularly capital. Capital is vital, but it's really got to come into what your social capital is, and being able to connect with other partners that would be able to help add additional value to what it is that you're trying to do, be it value that can be something turned into something tangible, like a partner that can open up a new distribution channel for you, or someone that is really skilled in global logistics, some of the things that we're handling. So intelligent capital, and really being able to come on board and offer a broad range of expertise. I think that's the biggest one, in my opinion.
Yeah. I would add on to that. I always say, we bootstrapped this thing from day one, and it began 10 years ago as a single program that in 2011 we incorporated as a 501c3. And I've always said that relationship has been our greatest currency. And, it's not just investors or donors. A lot of the support that we've received has been from the artist community. And so a lot of creative capital as well, that services that we could not afford, that we have relied on to publicize our work and inspire and spread the ideas, right? And so I agree, I want to echo that it's not just capital, it's all forms of capital, social capital, creative capital, and really also helping to set us up to be as self-reliant, as independent as possible. Although we're a nonprofit, a majority, about 90% of our revenue is earned revenue. And so we're a nonprofit, but we function more as a social enterprise, as a for-profit. And, we hustle. Every day we're hustling, And so we need folks to help us be smarter about how we hustle, and not just have the resources to fund a program, but also to earn more revenue through our intellectual property that we're developing all the time in partnership with community.
I'll add really quick. I think incentivizing collaborative work within your portfolio companies. Let's say there's a company, like for instance, our company, we go out there and we collect data for what things that people are testing for: HIV, cancer, malaria, but what kind of medicine are people buying? And we have platforms and softwares and technology that we need to be able to make that happen. But you may have a company that's doing that and us, and we're both in your portfolio, but you've already funded both of us. But you can also add that added incentive to say, if you guys work together, we can also support that as well.
Hi, my name's Jonathan. The keynote speaker in the first session talked about the value of the structure that you choose, sending a signal to the people that you might work with about what your mission is. So I have possibly a bit of a controversial question. Have any of you found that because you have chosen these sorts of structures like a 501c3 or called yourself a social entrepreneur, that in fact, when it comes to revenue generation, you're working up against, possibly sometimes very unreasonable expectations about what you ought to be paid for, frankly, in some cases, extremely valuable and important products and services?
I think it's a great question. And it's controversial, and it's something that is a delicate balance that we're still dealing with every single day. And sometimes that can also come, sort of dovetail on Elaine's question in terms of impact investment. The choice to become a for-profit and do good and make sure that you really have a tangible impact on the ground in a social manner, an environmental manner, and so forth, sometimes you're kind of upheld to, well, you're making too much money. Well, you're not making enough money to actually be able to warrant having an investment come in. So like anything, you really got to be able to follow with what your gut and ultimate vision is and be able to reverse engineer it and kind of stand by that. I think there's a lot of confusion around the area of what some of those expectations are and what some of the expectations are with whatever path it is that you chose. If you're a 501c3, God forbid you make any money, or where is it that you actually direct that? So I think that that's going to be a continued conversation that we're going to have. But if you really stick with what your ultimate goal is and kind of stand by that, I personally think that's the way to go.
I would say, like, there's this thing they say, do well, we're doing good. Mm-hmm. There's so many companies that have done that, and some of them have controversies, some don't. Like Tom's Shoes, Ethos Water. There's so many of them. But at the same time, it goes back to you as a person. 50 years from now, you want to look back and say, how do you want to be remembered? And you just stick to that. And people are going to pressure you into going one direction or another. But if you stick to what your vision and mission is as a person, you just stand firm to that.
And to that, I would add that it's not permanent. I mean, there are ways that we've seen here that people have adapted with various complementary business structures as their organization has grown.
I have a question if there is time. This is Sachin Chaudhary. I'm the founder of Trust Circle. I'm working in the mental health space, and my question is for Thomas. Thomas, do you see taking your unique idea of impacting the mental health space, and growing it internationally, especially in India and other countries?
Yes, and I also want to say that it's already happening, right? Just like hip hop is everywhere, people are using it in service of their mental health. And so for me, it's less about spreading our dialect of that or our interpretation of that, but connecting with others who are doing a version of that and developing tools and resources to support the advancement of their work and create an international network. And so a new project that I want to kick off is to create a center for all of those people, a center for advancement of hip hop therapy, and to create an international provider network of folks who are doing the work. And so this is an example of what Michael mentioned earlier. BRL is financially successful and has, we are able to scale our model. That's not enough because there are people around the country and around the world that we're aware of that hit us up all the time and say, hey, we want to learn from you. We want to replicate what you're doing, but we don't have the same local support or the local resources. And so yes, absolutely, we want to scale internationally, but we want to do it in such a way that it's really collaborative in nature, and it's partnering with existing movements and coming together. As I said, you want to go far, you go together, and we really believe in that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So thank you. So I want to.
In the interest of time, this will be the last question today. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, hi. This question is really more for Brandy, having worked on the ground in, let's say, Africa. When you're trying to create something that requires the participation, or maybe you're playing a network leadership role in trying to make this activity happen, and you're partnering NGOs, government, what are the driving factors? Is it shared financial incentives, shared social impact goals? I mean, how do you get organizations to work with you that are already super busy or super, focused on what they're trying to do, and you're asking them for help or working together? How do you create that unity?
That's a really good question, too. You guys are good. I think the interesting thing is always know where somebody's coming from, or at least be curious enough to investigate it. So if when we are approaching different governments, for example, Ethiopia, we know that infrastructure is one of the big things that they are looking to continue to develop. That is something that we knew that we could contribute to. And so if you kind of, for lack of a better word, going about it in a bit of a game theory sort of way, know what it is that they're looking to achieve, know what it is that how you may be able to contribute to that. And then quite literally go into it eyes wide open and ears, more importantly, wide open, and sometimes mouth closed. So you can actually just be curious and find out what is it that you are looking to achieve, how is it that we may be able to establish something that would be mutually beneficial, and oh, hey, let me connect these ties with some of the on-the-ground organizations that are also looking to be able to achieve some of the same things. And I think taking that approach has been really successful for us, and I think that would be across the board. It's just eyes wide open, be really curious, and drop some of your preconceived notions, do your homework, research, and connect some of those dots. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Great. So I want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you for joining us, for sharing your stories.